Rain hissed against the iron roof of the saloon, each drop cutting through the laughter that filled the room. A woman pushed through the swinging doors, her shadow swallowing the yellow lamplight. She was broad-shouldered, soaked to the bone, her apron plastered to her body like a second skin. Mud clung to her hem and her boots left dark scars across the floorboards. For a moment, no one recognized her. Then someone at the poker table snorted. "Well, hell." The cooks finally left her kitchen. The room erupted in laughter. She didn't flinch. Her eyes, small but burning with something unholy, swept across the faces, men with whiskey tongues and gun belts heavy with arrogance. Her voice came low, scraping the silence raw. "Which one of you killed my daughter?" The piano stopped mid-note. Chairs creaked. A glass shattered. For an instant, even the rain seemed to hold its breath. Then a man near the bar, a thin drifter with a snake tattoo curling around his wrist, grinned and spat tobacco into a spittoon. "Lady, you lost more than your manners. Ain't no daughter of yours worth dying over." His words were gasoline. Her hand moved faster than most would believe possible for someone her size. The revolver barked, deafening in the narrow room. The bullet kissed his cheek, carving a line of blood before burying itself in the wall. He stumbled back, face pale. "Next one," she said, voice trembling but steady, "goes through the liar's mouth." The bartender froze with his hands raised, eyes flicking from her to the wounded man. "Ma'am," he whispered, "you're making enemies you can't kill all at once." She stepped back, holstering the weapon, rain still dripping from her hat. "Then I'll start with the loudest." She turned and pushed out into the storm, the doors swinging behind her like an exhale of fear. The men inside stayed silent, every one of them memorizing her face, every one of them certain she'd be dead before morning. Outside, her horse stamped impatiently in the mud, a worn mare the color of ash. She mounted with effort, her breath misting in the cold air. The revolver felt heavy on her hip, heavier still with the name she'd carved into the handle. 3 so far, each a man she'd buried herself. She didn't look back. Lightning forked across the sky, showing the wide, desolate street of Red Hollow. Shutters banged against the wind. Somewhere, a coyote howled like a curse. She rode on, past the church ruins and the half-collapsed water tower, until the saloon lights became nothing but embers in the rain. Her name was Martha Hensley, though no one had spoken it kindly in years. To most, she was just the cook from the Hargrove Ranch, the woman who never smiled, who moved slower than the others, who sweated in silence while the ranch hands mocked her behind her back. But to one girl she had been mother, comfort, and world entire. Lily had been 16, all laughter and sunlight, a creature too gentle for the dust she was born into. Martha still heard her voice in dreams, singing while kneading dough, humming by the fire, her laughter echoing in the tin pots. It had been 2 years since she disappeared, 2 years since Martha found her bonnet torn near the riverbank, spotted with blood that wouldn't wash away. The sheriff had shrugged. "Probably ran off with some drifter, Miss Hensley. Happens all the time." She had stood in his office, apron still stained with flour, shaking. "You think my girl ran off without her boots? Without her horse? Without telling me goodbye?" His only answer was silence, then a look that told her to stop asking questions. That was the day she stopped baking pies and started counting bullets. The memory burned as she rode through the storm. The land stretched endless before her, black hills against a bruised sky, sagebrush flattened under the rain. The smell of wet dust and iron filled her lungs. Every ache in her body spoke of years spent kneading dough, hauling water, carrying pain that had never been shared. Now that strength had turned into something harder, sharper. Vengeance had become her spine. A flash of lightning illuminated a sign half buried in the mud. Red Hollow, 2 miles. She tugged the reins and felt the mare resist before obeying. The horse was tired, but so was she. She rode hunched forward, lips moving silently around her daughter's name. In her coat pocket, she carried a locket, tarnished, cracked. Inside it a single lock of Lily's hair and a silver button engraved with a serpent. She'd found that button near the riverbank the same day she found the bonnet. The sheriff said it meant nothing. Martha knew better. The rain began to thin, turning to mist. The desert stretched out under a half-shattered moon, silver and unforgiving. Ahead, the faint glow of lanterns marked the edge of town. Red Hollow, where whiskey drowned conscience and laughter covered blood. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest like the hooves of 100 horses. The serpent's trail had led her here, to the very men who had turned her life into an open wound. As she reached the town's edge, her mare stumbled, nearly throwing her. She steadied the animal, whispering, "Easy, girl. We've come too far to fall now." Her voice was soft, almost kind, the first gentleness she'd allowed herself in days. She dismounted, letting the reins hang loose, and looked around. The rain had stopped, leaving the world slick and shining. She could hear the muffled laughter from the saloon, distant and cruel. It echoed like ghosts. She walked toward the inn, a place she'd passed years ago while delivering supplies for the ranch. It looked smaller now, decayed. The windows glowed faintly, smoke curling from the chimney. She pushed through the door. Inside, an old woman behind the counter stared at her, recognition flickering. Martha Hensley? The name sounded foreign, like it belonged to someone already buried. Martha nodded. Need a room for the night? The woman hesitated. You shouldn't be here. Not with that look in your eyes. Martha reached into her coat and set 2 coins on the counter. I'm not here for rest. The woman's hands trembled as she slid over a rusted key. They'll kill you, you know. Martha looked at her, eyes steady, voice quiet. Then I'll die closer to my child. Later, in the small upstairs room, she sat on the edge of the bed and unbuckled her gun belt. The revolver rested on the table beside a candle stub. She wiped the mud from its barrel, tracing each carved name with her thumb. Rain dripped from her coat onto the floorboards, pooling around her boots. She could feel the fatigue settling deep in her bones, but sleep refused to come. The night air smelled of whiskey and smoke. Somewhere below, a man laughed too loudly, the sound scraping against her nerves. She opened the locket and stared at the strand of hair, silver in the candlelight. Tomorrow, she whispered. Tomorrow I end it. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of wet dust and gunpowder. A new storm was coming, not from the sky but from her heart. And for the first time in 2 years Martha smiled, not from joy but from certainty. Tomorrow someone in Red Hollow would answer for what they did to her daughter. Morning broke gray and low over Red Hollow, the streets still glistening with rainwater. Martha stepped out of the inn, her boots sinking slightly into the mud, the cold air biting her skin awake. The world felt hungover, heavy with silence after the night's storm. She adjusted her hat, cinched her coat tighter, and started toward the outskirts of town where the land widened into open prairie. Behind her, shutters creaked and a dog barked once before vanishing into the stillness. She knew eyes followed her from behind curtains. Red Hollow had a way of watching strangers and pretending not to. The air smelled of smoke and wet cedar. Her stomach growled, but she ignored it. The hunger she carried wasn't for food. It was sharper, older. She had questions that only one kind of man could answer, the kind who thought a mother's pain was just another campfire story. The memory of the snake tattoo flashed through her mind, the way the man's grin had faltered when her bullet had grazed his cheek. He would tell her what she needed to know before the sun set, or she'd feed the crows with his regrets. Her horse waited by the livery, chewing lazily on hay. The stable hand, a boy no older than 16, watched her with wide eyes. You headin' out alone? He asked. His voice cracked under the weight of curiosity. Martha fastened the saddle and looked at him. Been alone a long time, boy. He hesitated, then pointed north. Rattler boys ride that way sometimes. There's a shack by the ridge where they hole up when the sheriff comes sniffin'. She met his gaze, studying the nervous twitch in his jaw. You ever seen a girl's locket there? Silver chain, maybe a flower on the clasp? The boy frowned, thinking. No, ma'am. But I seen a man wearin' a button shaped like a snake's head. He's mean as fire, rides a black horse. Folks say he used to run with Silas Kane. The name landed like lead in her chest. Kane. She'd heard it whispered before, back on the ranch, in the saloon, in the sheriff's office where her pleas went ignored. If the Rattler boys were tied to him, then this was no small-town evil. This was rot spreading through the veins of the territory itself. Martha nodded, slipped a coin into the boy's hand and mounted her horse. If anyone asks, she said, you never saw me. The boy nodded quickly, eyes wide with fear and awe. She rode out into the prairie, the wind tugging at her coat, the morning sun struggling to break through the clouds. Hours passed under a pale sky. The land rolled out flat and endless, dotted with brittle sagebrush and blackened stumps where lightning had struck. She rode until her back screamed and her hands went numb around the reins. Each mile felt heavier than the last, as though the earth itself was testing her resolve. But she'd carried heavier things: shame, loss, silence. This was nothing compared to the night she buried the last piece of her daughter's laughter in the dirt. By midday she spotted a thin column of smoke rising from the ridge. Her pulse quickened. The shack stood crooked against the horizon, one wall caved in, roof patched with rusted tin. 2 horses grazed nearby, their saddles still on. She dismounted and tied her mare to a post, her fingers trembling slightly as she checked her revolver. She crept closer, her boots silent in the dust. Voices drifted from inside, two men arguing, one drunk, one calm and low. "I told you not to bring her trinkets here," the sober one said. "If Kane finds out." "The girl's dead, who's gonna tell him?" the drunk replied, laughing. Martha's vision blurred for a moment, rage clawing up her throat. She pressed her back against the wall, listening. The sound of metal scraping, one of them cleaning a knife. The other poured whiskey. She stepped through the doorway like a shadow breaking from stone. The drunk man looked up first. "What the hell?" The bullet caught him before the sentence did. He fell backward, bottle shattering beside him. The other man reached for his gun, but she was already on him, slamming the barrel into his jaw. He hit the dirt, blood spraying from his mouth. She kicked the revolver from his reach and crouched beside him. "The girl," she said, voice like gravel. "You remember her?" He spat blood, eyes wide with shock. "Lady, I don't know what you're talking about." She pressed the barrel against his throat. 16. Brown hair. Sang in the market. "You killed her or you watched it happen." He tried to laugh but it came out as a wheeze. "Didn't kill her. Wasn't me. But I know who did. Kane's boy." Drunk fool thought he was owed whatever he wanted. "We told him to leave her be but he stopped when she cocked the hammer." "Where?" she demanded. "Where's Kane's boy now?" The man's eyes darted to the window. "Town. Runs the Coyote Saloon for his old man. You won't make it 10 steps through that door." She pulled the trigger just once, close enough that the bullet tore through his shoulder. His scream echoed through the empty ridge. "I've made it farther than 10 steps before," she said. She left him alive but broken, stumbling to her horse with hands slick from sweat and blood. The sky had begun to clear, streaks of sunlight piercing the clouds. The wind smelled of sage and iron. She climbed into the saddle, every muscle in her body shaking from exhaustion and fury. The road back to Red Hollow stretched long and silent before her. Somewhere in that town, the man who murdered her daughter was laughing over a drink, believing the past had buried itself. She would prove him wrong before the week was done. By dusk, she reached the edge of the valley, the lights of Red Hollow flickering in the distance like dying stars. Her mare limped slightly but Martha didn't slow her pace. She rode until the first lamps of the town shimmered close enough to touch. For a moment, she stopped at a ridge overlooking the rooftops and the curling chimney smoke. Her heart beat slow and steady, a drum of purpose. The wind caught her hat, tugging it back, revealing the hard lines of her face, creases carved by grief, by fire, by time. Below her lay the town where her life had ended and her vengeance would begin again. She exhaled slowly, eyes narrowing against the sunset. "I'm coming for you," she whispered to the wind, and the prairie swallowed her words like a promise. Red Hollow simmered under the weight of its own sins as Martha rode back into town. The sun had sunk behind the hills, and the sky glowed like dying embers, orange bleeding into purple, the air thick with heat and dust. Her horse's hooves struck the ground with steady rhythm, echoing off empty buildings. The laughter that usually spilled from the saloons was quieter tonight, cautious, as if the town itself sensed something approaching it in the dark. She rode straight for the Coyote Saloon, the place where the snake's trail ended. The wooden sign creaked above the doorway, its paint peeling, the serpent emblem carved into the frame mocking her from the shadows. Inside the light was dim, thick with cigar smoke and sweat. The air reeked of whiskey and fear disguised as confidence. Martha stepped through the doorway, scanning the crowd. Men huddled over poker tables, women leaned against the bar pretending to smile. At the far end, behind a brass counter lined with half-empty bottles, stood a man younger than she expected, dark-haired, well-fed, the kind of cruel handsome that only power can polish. He poured whiskey without looking up, his gold ring catching the light. The shape of the ring, a coiled serpent, tightened something in her chest. She walked to the bar, boots clicking against the floorboards. "Whiskey," she said, her voice calm. He poured her a glass, eyes still on the counter. "Don't usually serve strangers this late," he said. His tone was soft, practiced, bored. She took the drink but didn't raise it. "You're Kane's boy," she said. It wasn't a question. His gaze lifted, slow and cold, meeting hers with the faintest smile. "People say a lot of things about me. Which ones you believe?" She didn't blink. "The ones that end with a girl's grave." The words dropped like a stone into a still pond. A few men at nearby tables stopped their cards mid-deal. The silence pressed against her ears. The man's smile faltered for just a breath, then returned sharper. "You must be that fat cook they've been talking about," he said. "Heard you like shootin' men who talk too loud." His words tried to sting, but she'd heard worse from worse men. Only shoot those who need it, she replied, her hand resting lightly on the revolver at her hip. And you're at the top of that list. A shadow moved from the corner of the room. A tall man, one of the Rattler gang, hand drifting toward his holster. Martha caught the motion in her periphery, spun, and fired before his fingers even brushed metal. The gunshot thundered through the room. He fell like a puppet with its strings cut, his chair toppling behind him. Smoke coiled from her barrel, her breath steady. She turned back to the bar. Now, she said, we can talk. Kane's son hadn't moved, though his jaw tightened. He poured himself a drink, swallowed it in one motion, and leaned closer. You think you'll walk out of here alive, lady? He asked, voice low. You came to the wrong town looking for justice. Her answer was a whisper. I didn't come for justice. I came for truth. For a moment he said nothing. Then his smile cracked, revealing something bitter underneath. Truth, he said. Fine. The girl was pretty. My pa's men took her from the road, brought her here. I told them to send her away. They didn't listen. She screamed. My father told me to forget it, said we'd bury it like all the rest. He lifted his glass again. Now here you are, digging up ghosts. Her hand shook. The room blurred. The words cut through her like barbed wire. She saw her daughter again, bare feet, torn dress, crying for help. No one answered. She wanted to shoot him, end it now, but something in his tone stopped her. There was no pride in his voice, no pleasure. Just guilt too late to matter. Where is he? She asked. Your father. He hesitated, eyes flicking toward the back room. Upstairs. Sleeps off his liquor before midnight. But you don't want him, lady? He's worse than the devil you came for. I'll take my chances. She turned toward the stairs. Men moved to stop her, but one look at the revolver in her hand froze them where they stood. The wooden steps groaned under her weight as she climbed, each one a heartbeat closer to reckoning. The hallway above was narrow, the air thick with stale whiskey and the faint reek of blood. A single lantern burned low at the end of the corridor, casting long shadows. She could hear snoring behind one of the doors, the sound heavy, guttural. She pushed the door open slowly. The room inside was cluttered with bottles, poker chips, and a half-burned cigar still smoking in an ashtray. On the bed lay a man with a chest broad as a barrel and a beard streaked gray. His revolver hung on a nail beside the nightstand. The serpent ring gleamed on his hand. Silas Kane. She stepped forward, gun raised, but the floorboard creaked. His eyes snapped open. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then he rolled off the bed, grabbing for the pistol. Her shot rang out, splintering the wood where his hand had been. He cursed, ducking behind the dresser. Another shot exploded, tearing through the lantern and plunging the room into half-darkness. Smoke filled the air. Who the hell are you? He shouted. The mother of the girl you buried, she screamed back. The words hung in the dark like thunder. Another gunshot, closer this time. A splinter grazed her cheek. She dove behind the table, reloading with shaking hands. Your boy told me everything, she said. You killed her because she begged for mercy. Kane's voice came ragged, bitter. Mercy's for the weak. Out here, the strong live, the rest feed the worms. She fired again. The bullet caught him in the leg. He fell with a grunt, gun clattering from his grasp. She crossed the room in 3 strides and kicked it away. The smell of gunpowder and blood mingled, sharp and metallic. He looked up at her, eyes wide with hate. You think killing me changes what's been done? He hissed. No, she said softly. But it stops it from happening, again. She leveled the revolver, but before she could fire, footsteps thundered up the stairs. The door burst open. Kane's son, face pale, gun drawn. Stop, he shouted. Don't do this. His voice trembled, half fear, half pleading. She looked at him, then at his father bleeding on the floor. You had your chance to stop him 2 years ago, she said. Now it's mine. The son hesitated, torn between blood and conscience. Then, with a broken cry, he turned his gun on his father. I'm sorry, he whispered. The shot echoed through the building, louder than the storm outside. Kane slumped back, eyes empty. The son dropped his weapon and sank to his knees, shaking. Martha stood motionless, the smoke curling around her like fog. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then she holstered her gun, voice barely more than breath. Bury him deep. And remember her name. She walked out into the hallway, leaving the door ajar behind her. The saloon below was silent. The men who had mocked her hours ago now watched with eyes wide and mouths closed. She stepped out into the night, the stars cutting through the darkness above. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled again. She felt no triumph, only a hollow calm, the ache of something ending before she could name it. But beneath it all, a question lingered, one that would not rest. What comes after vengeance? The rain had returned by the time the sun set over Dust Vale, falling in thin silver threads that hissed on the roofs and softened the sound of boots on the street. The saloon's lamps glowed through the storm, their light trembling on the wet window panes. Inside, the air was thick with whiskey and fear. Every head turned as the door creaked open, and the obese cook stepped in again. The woman they once mocked, now armed with a revolver and a name burning on her tongue. Her hat dripped rainwater down her face, but her eyes, hard and clear, never left the man by the bar. He was taller than most, broad-shouldered, with a scar that ran across his jaw like a signature of old sins. The townsfolk called him the Marshal now, but years ago he had been something far worse. A hired gun for a cattle baron who had ordered the killing of her daughter when she'd witnessed a theft. The truth had festered for years under layers of silence, sealed with whiskey and lies. Tonight that silence was done. "You remember her?" the cook said, voice trembling but steady. "You remember the girl you shot by the river road?" A tremor passed through the room. The piano player stopped mid-chord. The marshal's hand twitched toward his gun but froze when he saw the barrel already pointed at him. Rain thundered harder outside, drumming like war. "She was 16, the cook said, stepping closer, each bootstep leaving muddy prints on the wooden floor. "You buried her like a dog." "I dug her up with my own hands." Her voice cracked, but her stance didn't. The man behind the bar reached slowly for a rifle. A shot cracked before he could touch it. The cook's bullet shattered the bottle beside him, whiskey spilling like golden blood. "Stay out of this," she warned, her voice low and fierce. Then, from the shadows near the stairs, another figure emerged. The ranch hand who had given her shelter, the quiet man with kind eyes and weathered hands. He'd followed her despite her protests, knowing she'd walk straight into a death sentence. His coat was soaked through, his face ghost pale under the lantern light. "Put it down," he whispered to her. "You've done enough." But she didn't. The gun trembled slightly in her hand, not from fear, but from the exhaustion of carrying vengeance for too long. "If I let him live," she said, "I'll never stop hearing her scream." The marshal smirked, a cruel, jagged smile that made her blood boil. "You think you're the only one who's lost someone out here? We all got ghosts, lady. Yours just screams louder." That was when the ranch hand stepped forward, placing himself between them. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise like a blade. "She's not the only one looking for peace," he said. "You want to make it right? Confess. Tell the town what you did. Or let her take your life, but either way this ends here." The marshal sneered and went for his gun. Lightning flashed, white, blinding. 2 shots rang out. Then silence. The cook stood still, smoke curling from her revolver. The marshal staggered, eyes wide in disbelief, then fell to the floorboards, his blood seeping into the cracks. The ranch hand caught her wrist before she dropped the gun. Her shoulders shook, and the tears she had buried for years came at last, mixing with the rain that leaked through the roof. No one spoke for a long moment. Then, slowly, the piano started again, a soft, trembling hymn that sounded like forgiveness. She turned to leave, but the ranch hand caught her arm gently. "It's over," he said. "You don't have to run anymore." Her face softened for the first time. The lines of grief were still there, but beneath them flickered something fragile, peace. Together they walked out into the storm. The town watched in silence, knowing they'd seen something sacred, something terrible and necessary. The wind howled across the empty street, carrying away the last echoes of the gunshots. The cook stopped by the hitching post, her eyes on the dark horizon where the land rolled away into nothing. "I thought I'd feel lighter," she said. "You will," the man replied. "It just takes time." She looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time she saw more than pity in his eyes. She saw understanding. The kind that grows only in people who've lost too much and live to tell about it. He offered her his coat. She took it, her fingers brushing his. No words passed between them. None were needed. They left Dust Vale before dawn. The sky was bruised purple, the rain easing to a mist. Behind them, the saloon's sign creaked in the wind, and the sheriff's badge lay forgotten in the mud. Ahead lay miles of empty road, wildflowers growing along the ditches, the scent of wet earth rising like memory. As they rode away, the cook glanced once over her shoulder. The town was shrinking into the horizon, swallowed by the pale light of morning. Her daughter's grave lay on a hill outside of town, marked by a simple cross and a strip of her apron tied to it like a flag. The cook raised her hand, a silent farewell. The ranch hand reached over, resting his palm over hers on the reins. "Where will you go?" he asked. "Someplace quiet," she said. "Maybe start a kitchen again. Maybe teach some orphan how to bake bread." He smiled faintly. "That sounds right." The wind picked up again, tossing her hair across her face. The sky cleared by degrees, revealing a wide, aching blue. She took a deep breath, the first free breath she'd drawn in years. By midday they stopped by a ridge where the land opened to endless plains. She unpacked her daughter's locket, kissed it once, and buried it in the soft earth beneath a wild rose bush. Then she looked up, the weight finally lifting. Somewhere far off, thunder rumbled, but it was soft, almost tender, like the sound of a world forgiving itself. When the campfire burned low that night, she sat close to the flames, the ranch hand beside her, both of them wrapped in the same blanket of silence and smoke. He poured her coffee, she smiled faintly, and for once it wasn't a mask. "And if you'd been sitting there by that fire, listening to the wind move through the grass, smelling the rain still clinging to the ground, you'd have heard her laugh. Soft, weary but real. And maybe you'd have smiled too, because some stories don't end with revenge or grief. They end with a breath, a glance, a quiet promise that life goes on. Now, friend, if you've stayed by this fire long enough to hear her tale, don't forget to tip your hat before you leave. There are more stories waiting down the road, and I'll be here when the next storm rolls in."